Welcome back, wordsmiths and story seekers. I am your host, Daniel Willcocks, broadcasting from the shadowy halls of Devil's Rock HQ. And tonight I am thrilled to share the writer's chair with the insanely talented Paul Tremblay. Now, this episode first appeared on the Other Stories podcast back in 2024. And at the time, Paul was promoting Horror Movie, his brand new book at the time, which I have in hardback. And it has this gorgeous sort of reptilian skin on the cover. And it's a fantastic book. It's lovely to hold a hardback that's thick and meaty and heavy. And just getting the chance to sit down with Paul was really, really surreal because I met Paul back in 2023 at the Stoker conference. And he was praising Mariana Enriquez's book, Our Share of the Night, which is still on my TBR and I still need to read. And it's really annoying me that it's been there so long. But Paul is a big influence on the stuff that I do. I was a big fan when I read Cabin at the End of the World. The film adaptation I thought was solid, even if they changed the ending slightly. And his book, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, nice little tidbit for you, is actually part of the reason that I created a publishing company called Devil's Rock Publishing. Many more reasons go into it. That was one small part of that puzzle, but it was a bit of an influence. So to have one of the guys that helped inspire the publishing company that I founded come onto the show, chat to me about his horror and all the amazing things going on was awesome. And there is so much meat in this interview for you to get your teeth into. We go into how A Head Full of Ghosts became a breakout hit for Paul and what it was like when Stephen King tweeted about it. We spoke about why Texas Chainsaw Massacre helped inspire Horror Movie, how Paul approaches structure and storytelling in mixed media fiction, what today's horror landscape gets right and where it's in danger of going wrong, the authors that are redefining modern horror, so we mentioned Mariana Enriquez, there's John Langan, Stephen Graham Jones and more, and why persistence and not perfection is the real secret to a lasting writing career. As I say, this is a very, very fun interview, so stick around for that. But before we get into the meat of the interview, just want to note that if you're listening to this podcast, you are very much in the early wave of something very, very exciting that I'm working on at the minute. And if you're already in the Discord group, you will know about this. If not, welcome. I am announcing right here on this podcast a soft launch of my brand new website, Devil's Rock Books. Now, you might have been on the website already to look up podcast information or just to see what's going on with Devil's Rock. But I have now officially launched the Horror Library. And what the Horror Library is a resource for readers to come through and find human-created horror. So one of my biggest frustrations is going onto the Amazon charts and seeing that all the horror charts are diluted with fantasy and romance and all these other genres that don't really count as horror. And for a horror enthusiast like myself, there just isn't a place where you can go and just see fantastic reads, like find new books, find new authors. And so I've decided to build one myself. And I've got help in this venture. I've got Kiz, who is in our Discord community, helping me get books onto the website, uploading what will be a huge database of every horror book we can get our hands on. That is quality. It is human sourced. So I don't want any AI books on there or anything else like that. And my plan is to make it a safe little haven sanctuary for any horror reader to come know that they can connect with the horror authors that are really putting in the hard work and making amazing stuff. So all of that you can find over at devilsrockbooks.com. The website will grow. At the minute, it's very much in its infancy. I'm going to expand on the genres. I'm going to make it trope filterable so people can find exactly the types of horror that they want. But it's a lot of hard work. And so we're in the soft launch phase where I want people to come over to the website, try it out, give us feedback, recommend your own books. If you've got some books on there that either you've written and you want to upload to the database, or say database, the library, or if you just love an author's books and I don't know about them, just please let me know. There's buttons all over the website where you can recommend all your favorite reads. We can check them out behind the scenes, make sure they're all up to stuff, and then we can just get them onto there so that other horror readers and enthusiasts can find out about them. So I'm very, very excited about that. If you are listening to this episode on the day that it launches or in the weeks preceding, you are going to be the first through the door to check this out. And already people are starting to find it organically, and it's very exciting to see all the hits on the website going up as people are finding their latest horror reads. And yeah, I just hope it can be a resource that really battles back the tide of AI curation, really gives horror readers, horror writers a home to grow and just be around each other and just enjoy all things horror. So check it out, devilsrockbooks.com, and it's straight on the homepage, so it's all there for you. And now with that little ramble, we will go into the interview with one of my own personal writing heroes, Paul Tremblay. Please do enjoy.
Hi, it's me, Danny Willcocks, and joining me in this week's The Other Stories Writers' Chair, I've got the sensationally spooky Paul Tremblay. Paul Tremblay has won the Bram Stoker, British Fantasy, and Massachusetts Book Awards, and is the author of Survivor Song, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearing to Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, the crime novels The Little Sleep and No Sleep to Wonderland, and the short story collection Growing Things and Other Stories. His essays and short fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Entertainment Weekly Online, and numerous years' best anthologies. He has a master's degree in mathematics and lives outside Boston with his family. But really, Paul, what have you done with your life? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. No, happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Very excited to have you. I know we kind of met briefly last year, had a very small talk, so it's nice to have a bit of one-on-one time with you and get a bit indulgent on all things horror. So just for the listeners who might not know who you are, can you give a little overview of your writing career, how you got to where you are now, and kind of where that love of horror writing came from?
Sure. So, yeah, it's been sort of like a long, slow climb to wherever it is. I'm holding on by the fingertips now. In the U.S., my first novel was published in 2009, although that was a quirky detective novel called The Little Sleep, which is now available in the UK as well. Prior to that, I wrote mainly horror short stories, and it, just sort of stuck with it. And then 2015, my novel, A Head Full of Ghosts, is really sort of what broke me out, and I've been happily sort of been horrifying ever since, I hope, for some people, or for most.
That's such a succinct journey. Perfect. But I always find when people are like, how did you get started? It's like, I have to remember all these little building blocks. But yeah, I got my start in writing in 2015 is when I kind of started. And your name was populating the area then. So made that impression very much. It feels like one of the things that came very, very quickly for you. But obviously, like you say, didn't your first novel came out in 2009. So what was that like when you had that first sort of big hit from your horror collection?
Oh, yeah. If you wanted me to go further back, I started messing around with writing in the mid 90s, was very much a hobby until the early 2000s when I got more serious about it, because I had started selling short stories. And I don't know, it was just sort of I described it as being just dumbly persistent in general, just writing, getting rejected, writing, took me 2 years to find an agent, all those things, I just sort of kept at it. But yeah, it is kind of funny, that book, people are it's not an overnight sensation, because, I wouldn't necessarily describe what happened with The Head Full of Ghosts. Because that sort of had a little bit of its own build too. It came out, and then 3 or 4 months later, Stephen King tweeted about it, which obviously gave the book a big push. So, yeah, I don't know. I try not to focus on, what has already happened, and just really try to focus on the next story. Yes, next.
I love that, which is ironic because I'm about to dive back deeper into your past. Your love of horror. So, you've written a bunch of horror books now, and I've read a fair few of them myself, and they are all fantastic. I've just read your brand new release, Horror Movie, which we'll go on to very, very shortly and get some ground on that because it's fantastic. But where did that kind of first nugget of horror come from? What is it that brought the darkness into being for you?
In terms of thinking about movies and books and stuff like that, I really can't remember a time where I wasn't sort of both interested and terribly afraid of horror. For me, the first exposure was movies. We had a program local to the area I grew up in, a Boston television program. This is pre-cable TV, so I was 7, 8, 9. And on Saturdays it was called Creature Double Feature. And the first movie was always a kaiju movie, usually Godzilla, sometimes Gamera. And that's what sort of drew me in. And then the second movie would be a more classically identified horror movie. A lot of Hammer horror films, but also a lot of black and white films featuring giant things that have mutated. I would just, those movies would always give me nightmares, but I would still watch them. So I know, horror's just always been a part of me. That's why, usually and I'm sure this happens to you too, when people ask, what do you write? And you say horror, and the response is some form of disgust. Or, how do you do that? And my response is how is it not a part of your life? I don't understand, because it's always been a part of mine.
Yeah. I did that. I've got a theory as well, and I don't know if this will resonate with you, but I've got a real theory that a lot of people are horror fans, but the label horror gives them the ick, so they find a different way to label horror. So all this true crime detective stuff, all this they'll say they won't watch Cujo because the dog's too scary, but then they'll watch Jeffrey Dahmer eat people. I feel there's a weird kind of branding issue going on with horror, and particularly thriller.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And I think horror, maybe more so than most genres, is usually identified with maybe its worst representatives, or, that maybe that's a reflection of sort of the 80s horror movie boom where, a lot of people don't like, slasher films. And when you say horror to them, that's sort of what they envision as like Friday the 13th or something like that. When obviously, I mean, there's so many other and so very different kinds of horror stories. And, as you pointed out, many of which they like, but they just don't consider horror.
Yeah. So is there a particular genre of horror that you go for? I know you sort of write creatures, you've written a lot of sort of, there's some psychological stuff in there. What is your kind of like go-to horror? If you're sat down on a Friday afternoon and you're like, I'm going to scare the shit out of myself, what's your kind of go-to coverage?
Well, I mean, the cool part is there are so many different kinds. Whenever I say, I don't like this, there's an example of something in that like sort of mode or subgenre that I do like. But, I guess I tend to gravitate towards more like psychological, supernatural, spooky sort of horror. Mainly because like horror that, features human monsters is, sometimes way too scary for me. And it's hard to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got an example of one that's really, really freaked you out?
Yeah, I mean, all of them. But it took me forever to watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, partly because of its reputation.
Yeah.
And just the title alone. And when that movie was out and when I was first aware of it in the 80s, I mean, it wasn't out in the 80s, but when I first became aware of it, I couldn't go on the internet and look it up and like read the plot sort of description. So I just assumed, this is just like a, gore fest. And I didn't want to see people getting sliced by chainsaws. And of course, when I finally watched it, and actually somewhat recently, probably like, 10, maybe a little bit more years ago for the first time, I was like, oh my God, this movie is amazing. I had no idea, how bloodless it was, but still managed to be so like transgressive and disturbing. So I guess I've been thinking about that movie a lot, partly because of how it helped inspire at least the start of my novel horror movie, which I've been talking about a lot lately.
Segue.
What a segue.
What a segue. So absolutely, I was going to head there. So horror movie, your latest book. I've literally finished reading it today. I got it through the post on Thursday. I got one of the beautiful hardback copies with all the kind of scaly skin on it and like a nice little signature in there.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's
Thank you.
Books that, for me, and I know it's kind of tempting to say this because obviously you're on camera with me, but it really is a masterclass in the slow release. And it's one of those, it just kind of, it creeps forward. And I really like, and obviously I'm not going to do spoilers and things for people that want to go out and check it out, which I highly recommend people do. And we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes for that. But it's a real the only way I can kind of like think of it is a camera over someone's shoulder watching action from multiple timelines. And, tell us about how that kind of seed came into being for this book and where the idea for horror movie came from.
Well, part of it was like I happened to be watching a YouTube video of a writer or two writers. One of them was mainly a critic and essayist, and the other one writes fiction as well as a musician. So Walter Chow and John Darnielle were discussing Texas Chainsaw, and it was just a really fun discussion. Two super smart people who are talking about the movie in smart ways, but also we're talking about just as fans too. I don't mean to put the word just, because I am definitely a fan as well. So I know, so I dug into the movie a little bit more and like read, and read more about like what had happened on set and like how dangerous it was. And, that sort of made me think of like the curse movie sort of subgenre. And I was like, okay, I kind of wanted to like take a crack at that and sort of explore, I should say, and part of the reason why I was interested in it, it was sort of a way to sort of honor not honor, but I wanted to explore, how I first learned story for the first, 15, well, we'll call it from ages like 5 to 21, really. What I knew of story was through film and television. I wasn't a big reader as a child or a teenager. I didn't fall in love with reading for pleasure until, my early 20s. So it was kind of fun to sort of look back at that, like how that sort of inspired and / informed like what my understanding of story is. And now 30 years later, for me, even like now that I've read all these books, because I read more books than I watch movies now, it was kind of fun for me just to mess around with all that and hopefully make a disturbing, fun story, especially for people who are fans of horror movies.
How do you go about pitching a book like this? Because it's mixed medium. It's good, you've got the movie script in there, and then you've got sort of like these perspectives and the different timelines. How do you pitch that to a publisher?
Luckily, I didn't have to. I just it showed up on their doorstep. I had already. I was it was the last book of a book deal. Mm-hmm. And so, I had to pitch the first book of that deal was the Pallbearers Club. And so, I don't know, my editor, my U.S. editor trusts me enough that, If I don't pitch something, it'll still be something that they'll want to do. The funny part, so it always comes to the U.S. editor first, and then Titan Books has, so far followed along by offering the same deals. But, the U.S. editor is the one that does all the story editing.
Yeah. And for people who don't know what the story is about, give them a little pitch, give them a little bit of an overview.
Okay, yeah, sure. You're going to force me to make a pitch. Yeah. So it's hard. So, the main story revolves around this film, the story that was filmed in 1993 by a bunch of 20-something young filmmakers. Very low budget, independent, art house, pretentious kind of horror movie, which I always joke is my favorite kind. And something happens on set toward the end, this is not a spoiler, that sort of prevents it from being shown on screen. But in the 30 years since that happened, the movie that never was inexplicably has sort of like this rabid fan following, partly because of, in 2008, the director of the movie, before she died of cancer, uploaded 3 scenes from the movie and some stills and the whole screenplay. So the main part of the book is where most of the book is being narrated to us by a man who plays the character called the Thin Kid. You never get his name. So he's really narrating his experience, what had happened on set, sort of what had happened in the years in between, and what's happening now while a studio was doing like a big budget Hollywood reboot. And you also get the entire screenplay of the original movie. So, like I said, I'm not good at the pitch Hollywood sort of elevator summarization, but yeah.
Yeah, all good. So I'm going to go more into the writer's show in this bit. In writing a book like that, obviously you've got, as we say, multiple timelines, you've got kind of the mixed medium. How did you go about constructing that? Was it a case of, writing the full screenplay first? Was it, taking a look at one character?
Yeah.
How does that come together for Paul?
So for each book, I try to make each book feel a little bit different. I mean, obviously there's, sameness to approach at times. But for example, I'd say maybe about 60% or 2/3 of my novels, usually I write some sort of summary first, before I start typing, chapter 1. In this case, I just took like a lot of notes. I didn't write a summary. I kind of wanted to feel a little more freewheeling with it, as opposed to writing a summary. Although I essentially sort of summarized it as I went. Like I kept some very unorganized notes that actually Titan Books includes in their issue, or includes in their edition of horror movie. So I just kind of kept notes as I would sometimes peek ahead. But even though there is sort of this fractured timeline where things bounce around and things are broken up by the screenplay, I wrote it in the order in which you read it.
Interesting.
With the exception, there was one tiny chapter, the first chapter with the current day director, that I had a little bit later in the book, and I just moved it up like maybe 30 pages or something like that. But that was really the only thing I moved around timeline. And for me, that was what worked best. It was kind of fun to like write a chapter and then take a break and write like a screenplay section, and then go back to sort of the general narrative. And I don't know, I felt like that helped keep me sort of connected to keep all the pieces connected to each other, as opposed to just writing the screenplay and then trying to decide where I was going to divvy it up. I would say the one thing that's the same to everything that I write is I always write it in the order in which I think it's going to happen, even if there is, bouncing around the timeline. I can't imagine like trying to write, okay, I'm going to write this piece and go back and write this piece. It's just, my brain just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I've worked with a few writers that do that, and it blows my mind. I just can't. I very much have to be that forward driver as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything this book has taught you that you haven't learned from like another book? Is there like a particular lesson? Because I find that when I finish a work, there's always something new that I kind of discover about myself. I don't know if that's the same for you.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm really bad at like learning things from what I've written. I learn way more from other stuff that people write, that other reading things that other people write. Yeah, I don't know. I would have to sit and think hard about like what I learned. In some ways it's a little bit difficult because, I'm talking about the book now, but like I finished like the heart of writing it was the first draft that I turned in like March of 2022. So it's been almost like 2 years. So in some ways, the experience of writing it, it's not lost, but it's certainly affected by sort of the afterglow and, you sort of forget like the difficult parts. Well, sometimes you forget the difficult parts. Sometimes you just dwell on those. So yeah, it's kind of hard to know like what I learned from it. I mean, I kind of hope that each thing, will make me a better writer for the next one. But
Yeah.
I don't know. That's hard to say what I learned necessarily.
Totally understandable. And
Yeah.
you mentioned in the acknowledgements a lot of sort of the big names in the genre. There's John Langan, thanks in there. There's Stephen Graham Jones in there. Obviously, you're very entrenched in the horror scene. So probably the person that's very, very poised to ask this question to. No pressure. If you don't have an answer, I'll just build out a lot. But what is currently out there for you that's exciting you in horror? It's a genre that's ever changing. We've had a lot of sort of evolutions and things over the last 30, 40 years. What is currently exciting for you?
I mean, there's so much that's exciting. I mean, just aside from the fact that horror is actually being published as horror in the United States, which hasn't been a thing in a long, long time. That we're seeing so many, women and people of color and queer people getting to publish and tell their horror stories as opposed to just every writer looking sort of like me. So that's the biggest thing. But like individually, you already mentioned a couple of the writers to me that are writing, some of the most exciting horror fiction. You mentioned John and Stephen. I would include Mariana Enriquez. Again, like it's a reflection of a healthier publishing climate that we're seeing also more translated horror novels actually being published in the United States. I'm not sure. I think Mariana is being published. I know she is in the UK as well. I don't know. It's sometimes I know the UK and US publishing are slightly different, but no, it's a super exciting time. Other writers like Eric LaRocca in the UK, Alison Rumfitt. It's just really exciting to see all these. In the case of the last, a really transgressive, fiction that it tackles difficult, subjects without blinking and with integrity. To me, that's the most exciting part, because usually when you see, and this happens all the time in movies, when something sort of gets popular, everyone wants to copycat it, and usually those copycats are coming from like a cynical place.
Yeah.
And usually that's less from the writer, filmmaker side and more from the publisher / studio side of things. So, I mean, there is that. Like, I do fear, part of me fears that like horror will become like Scooby-Doo horror, where it has to have a happy ending. And that's like more based on conversations that I've had with Hollywood folk who've told me, and I put this in a horror movie, that, oh yeah, we want horror, but it can't be too grim and it has to have a happy ending. That's sort of like, I hope that's not the case. But again, all the writers I've mentioned are people who aren't, haven't succumbed to the, I would all describe them as artists.
Yeah.
With integrity. Yeah.
I think we're fortunate enough as well to live in a time in which, even if those rules kind of lock down in one area, there's always going to be sort of the rebellion, the independence that are able to bring that kind of more truer feel to the art, which is somewhat reassuring given sort of how global this has become.
Sure. No, I mean, I think it's not all of horror's job, if horror has a job, but the part of horror always hopefully being outsider art or something that's always commenting, making commentary, difficult commentary about like the larger cultural sphere. I mean, I think that's when horror operates at its best.
Agreed. If you can only recommend one book to your audience, one horror book to your audience, or not even a horror book to be fair, if you could recommend one book to our audience, what book would that be? And I know that you did just put an article up that had sort of 10. I don't know if that will some way guide you.
Just one? Well, I mean, I'll continue to keep blabbing about Mariana Enriquez's novel, Our Share of Night, which to me is just a towering work of genius and something that should be read by everybody. And I kind of wish I saw it discussed more widely in horror circles. Because I don't know how she's presented as an author in the UK. I would imagine it's similar in the US, where in the US, she's really presented as like, hey, here's a horror author. She's presented as a literary author, which is, fine by me. But, it's almost like, for years, and it still happens now, like so many people in the horror sphere, like, oh, the wider culture doesn't take us serious. The literary folk don't take us serious. And the reverse happens as well. I think some horror fans are reluctant to read people who are marketed as literary because, I don't know, maybe, they think, oh, it's not really horror. They're sort of like, just using it a little bit, kind of, I don't know. I don't want to ascribe people's motivations one way or the other. But, I would encourage more horror people to read Mariana Enriquez if you haven't already.
It's very reassuring that you put that on, because you recommended that when we met last year, and I've got the book. I'm yet to read it. It's definitely up there on my list. So it's nice when like that book sticks and it's like, no, it's still this book. Like, make sure you read that one. It's a big one as well. Like, That's one of the things that I'm missing a little from horror is like there are fewer big chunky books that you can get your teeth into these days.
No, 100%. Like, like most people, we're also busy. It's like, oh yeah, a short novel. It's something I could really, get into and not have to dedicate, X amount of hours to. But, one of the pleasures of that book is the reminder of the unique sort of experience of, living with a book with 2 or 3 weeks, just living in that world for 800 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that book is definitely worth the time investment.
So Mariana Enriquez, our show of the night. Who are some other authors that might not have the broadcast and the attention that you feel deserves it? Is there anyone that you've read that you're like, this needs to get a bit more heat under the flames?
Yeah. It's always kind of hard to answer because then like when someone here says like, wait a minute, I thought I was getting noticed. I don't know. I mean, so we mentioned John Lang, and I know he just for the first time had a UK publication of The Fisherman by Canelo Books, I believe. He is somebody that should be more widely read. I don't know. I'm going to mention some other books that were published by smaller presses as well.
Sure.
Nadia Bulkin, her collection's a few years old at this point, but if you've never read She Said Destroy, I would really recommend that book as well. She's a wonderful writer. I don't know. We'll stop at those two. How's that?
That's very accurate. That's
something anybody.
Oh, that's a question. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience while you've got the chance? Anything you want to say about horror or any of your own works coming up? Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I don't know about anything in horror in general. I'm really excited to see Longlegs in a couple of days with my daughter. So we've sort of made a plan to see. Have you heard of this movie?
No.
So it comes out in the U.S. on July 12th. The director is Osgood Perkins, who I love his movie Black Coat's Daughter, which is just amazing. I think its title was February in the UK, but I think it has since has changed to that. Anyway, it's a wonderful novel. It's a wonderful movie. He's a really interesting director. Longlegs has had like a really brilliant sort of campaign here in the US. So it's actually kind of exciting to see what I think that this really sort of, I haven't seen it yet, but it appears to be sort of a very disturbing occult / serial killer movie. And Oscar just has a really distinctive sort of off-kilter style. So maybe I shouldn't be talking about a movie that I haven't seen yet, but I'm very excited to see that coming this week. Otherwise, I don't know. My brain's kind of mush. Like we were talking before, I just finished like my first like nationwide US tour, which was like the last 3 weeks of June. And then of course I had COVID after that. So I'm just sort of emerging from that sort of bunker into the world that I've had. So my brain is also a little bit probably COVID mushy still too. Otherwise, hopefully people read horror movie next summer. I have a book called Another coming out. And that's a middle grade novel, which I just sort of happened to write on a whim, like right on sort of the heels of finishing a horror movie. I'd taken a year off because of the movie adaptation. It allowed me to take like a year sabbatical from teaching.
Yes.
So, I was actually I got a lot of stuff done that year, surprisingly. When you're not working a full-time job, or second full-time job, I should say, your other full-time job gets a lot more attention. So anyway, that's coming out next summer in the US. I'm not sure if I went in the UK yet, but I'm pretty excited about that. That was actually, to go back to I don't know what I learned, but I definitely felt like I learned some stuff writing from the point of view of 11/12-year-old.
I bet, yeah. I've written one sort of story for a younger audience that I haven't put out anywhere, but like just adjusting to the language and readjusting your expectations of what you know is scary to versus what children find scary, and kind of like how powerful smaller language can be. I'm under a real struggle personally with adjusting to my own horror expectations.
No, for me, I think it was more like I luckily came across sort of the story idea that fit in the story's demands. I felt like I didn't really have to make a lot of quote unquote like adult concessions. No swearing. My vocabulary probably isn't that big anyway. And honestly, I still feel like a 12-year-old sometimes. So I kind of felt like, this fits. This makes sense.
Perfect. Well, where can everyone find out more about yourself and all that you're working on?
Oh, so my website is just paultremblay.net. But if you go, you can sign up for a newsletter for free that, I clutter your email inbox only about once a month. I really try not to harangue people too much. So I usually write just sort of like a goofy little essay, but also talk about like what's coming and all that stuff. Otherwise, I'm on, X, Twitter, and Instagram. Both are at Paul G. Tremblay, and Blue Sky as well. So yeah, that's pretty much where I am.
Oh, perfect. So with that, I guess there's nothing left to say other than thank you so much, Paul, for jumping on the show and speaking to our Other Stories audience.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
No worries. And thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find out more about all that's going on with the Other Stories podcast over at theotherstories.net. And I will see you next time when we strap our next willing victim into the writer's chair. Bye-bye for now.
And there we go. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining me on the writer's chair this week. I will no doubt be in touch in the coming months to try and get you on for yet another more recent interview and see what you've been up to, because 2024, time flies. Time flies, but I loved speaking with him. And an especially big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Before you dash off, if you're craving deeper conversation, writing advice, or just fancy hanging out with fellow readers and storytellers, why not consider joining me in the Devil's Rock community on Discord? I'm on a mission to build the largest online space for fans of horror and dark fiction, a home where writers and readers can connect, create, and thrive together. It's free, open to all, and always crackling with inspiration. So if you're ready to pull up a virtual chair, head on over to devilsrockbooks.com/podcast for the invite link. And until next time, my friends, write bravely and dream dark.